This is really the idea that with digital transformation, firms can scale up very quickly with relatively little investment in capital or labor. The second one is around ownership, assets, and economic value. And this is really the idea that value from digitized information can be stored anywhere, really decoupling value from ownership. And the third is around relationships, markets, and ecosystems. And this is really the idea that information and data flow seamlessly across networks and borders, really challenging traditional notions of sovereignty and territoriality. So we're working on these vectors. Now we're moving on, go back there, to the second big project in this horizontal stream. This is a really important part of the project. We're trying to develop an integrated policy framework. This is really work in progress. We've been working for about a year on this across the OECD. And the main point of developing this integrated policy framework is really to change the way people think about policy making in the digital age. We've identified a series of 8 building blocks that are important to digital transformation. But the idea is to get out of the traditional silos that's reflected in our ministries and our departments and see digital transformation in an integrated way, because we know that policy making in one area can have implications in another, not just at the national level, but at the local and regional level and at the international level as well. So I'm not going to go into all of the blocks, but just to highlight one thing I think helps illustrate the framework is the idea about skills. We all know that skills are really important to digital transformation, to having it be a success, but you'll notice we don't have a skills building block. We look at skills from 3 different angles. One is you need skills to effectively use digital technologies. That's in the use building block. You also need skills for work. Not just about using technology, it's about high-performing work practices, managerial skills, and then you need what we call sort of skills for life, and that's what's in the well-being block there. So that gives you a little bit of a sense of how we're trying to develop this framework. Now, if we move to the next slide, we'll see sort of the second big bucket of work. We're basically not looking horizontal now, we're looking in the silos. This is analysis of digital transformation in particular policy areas. And work, we have over 80 projects in this stream of analysis. Work has already started to come out. You see some pictures there. We've got a report on digital transformation and transport, automated trucks. We just had a big ministerial on digital transformation and energy markets. We've done some work on competition. What does algorithmic transparency mean for competition nowadays? Tax, labor skills, among many others. And that leads me to the next slide, or the third sort of big bucket of the project. This is what we're calling kind of the cross-cutting activities. This is analysis of digital transformation in some, but not all, policy areas. And it really tries to crack some of the tough nuts. What is digital transformation for job skills and the nature of work? We're going to be looking in depth at the probability of automation of various occupations and what sort of efficient adjustment mechanisms might look like. There's another stream of work on productivity, competition, and market openness. What does it mean for productivity? How is it impacting competition? How is it changing the nature of trade? We have some work on digital trade and market openness that's feeding into this project here. And the last big thematic bucket is about well-being. It's not just about work, it's not just about the economy, it's about people and society. And using the OECD well-being framework, we're going to look at this issue through a digital lens and look at issues on the social side, on the health side, among others. And we probably wouldn't be at the OECD if we didn't have a big focus on measurement. We're looking at how we measure digital transformation in national statistics, which is hard. We're looking at measuring digital transformation with respect to cross-border data flows, which is also hard. We're trying to measure citizen trust. And we're going to try to put together a core set of going digital indicators that link then to each of the building blocks in the framework. So with that really short overview, I'm going to pass over to Duncan to give you an in-depth peek at what we're doing on foresight.
Okay, everyone. Hello, good afternoon. My name is Duncan Caspegs. I'm the Counselor for Strategic Foresight at the OECD. And I'm really delighted to be able to be here with you today to have what I hope will be a bit of an interactive discussion at the end of our presentations and to draw from your experience and backgrounds in helping us think through some of the scenarios work that I'm going to tell you about. So, as Molly has mentioned, the Going Digital Initiative is a massive initiative that's really engaging all parts of the OECD right now in thinking through what the digital transformation could mean in all of the areas of policy that we cover. And I like to encourage people around the organization to really see that the digital transformation has the potential to really challenge the fundamental issues in each and every area of policy that we're working in. Now, what I'm going to talk to you about is just one piece of that bigger initiative, which is our scenarios, our foresight scenarios piece, that's essentially being designed to try and provoke and encourage some more strategic thinking about the future, some more really out-of-the-box thinking to stretch our thinking. So the first, what are scenarios? So the first thing we like to make clear is that these are not predictions and they are not recommendations. Rather, what we're trying to develop is a set of plausible, provocative, alternative futures. The purpose is really to stretch the thinking. So why do we do this? We do this to help prepare for uncertainty. It is probably always a good idea to engage in alternative futures, to consider what they could mean, to consider different scenarios. But arguably, in this time of rapid change and certainly unprecedented global scale, this is arguably more important than ever that individuals and organizations and governments and civil society prepare not just for the future that they're expecting, but for the range of plausible alternatives that could come and could surprise them. The way we can use scenarios then is to help us identify new opportunities and challenges that we might not have seen sooner and help prepare for them. It also helps one to take policies that one already has, that one is already developing, and say, okay, this policy, this strategy we have now, it's well designed for the future that we're expecting, but would it still work well if we found ourselves in a different type of scenario? How future-proof, how adaptive, how responsive and resilient are our policies? And then finally, it can also be an input to us helping to think about the future that we would want. So our scenarios are not visions, they're not aspirational, they're not meant to be a statement of what's desirable. They're really meant to kind of stretch people's thinking to have a broader conception of how the future could be. But from that can generate some raw materials with which one can then have conversations about, well, what are the elements of these different scenarios that we would want to pull together as the vision for what we are trying to strive for in the future. But our point is that if one starts developing a vision for what you want from the future without looking more broadly at how that future could be, one will end up designing visions that are very similar and plans that are very similar to today rather than to our aspirational time frame, be that 2030 or 2035 or whatsoever. So in terms of when we came to the Going Digital Initiative, which is already looking at the digital transformation and how to have an impact, we asked, well, how can we contribute value to that? And we tried to do this really in two ways, by asking two questions. And I think these questions, while we're applying them to the OECD, they're questions that you could bring back to all of your organizations as well to help provoke your thinking about the digital transformation. And so the first step was really to ask people to think, what if the digital transformation came about even faster and further than expected? Now, there's a lot of uncertainty. Like, this is the first key critical uncertainty, which is how fast are a lot of these technological changes going to emerge, and how quickly are they going to impact and at what scale? So we say, we recognize that uncertainty, but for the sake of pushing our thinking, imagine that this stuff came, imagine the plausible extreme of a lot of these developments, and because I think there is a considerable risk that we continue to be underprepared and we're underestimating the level of change that we could plausibly see in the coming 10 to 15 years. Then the second step, we said, is to consider the plausible extremes that we could face across a range of different critical uncertainties. So to give you one example of a critical uncertainty that we often hear about, this is the impact of automation and technology on the future of work. So on the one hand, you will have world-class experts who will say, this is really not a problem, a lot of jobs will be disrupted, but we will create new jobs just as we always have in the past, and we will have unemployment rates that continue to be fairly low. On the other hand, you have equally reputable experts who are coming out with statistics everywhere from, in the 20s, 30s, 40% of technological unemployment that we could be facing. And so our point is, rather than as organizations thinking, well, the moderate, reasonable, responsible thing to do is just to sort of come down the middle line and sort of find an estimate or a prediction that's somewhat in between those extremes, it's actually to say, to recognize we don't know. The world's experts are in a state of high uncertainty about what's going to happen in this area. And what we actually need to do is to consider the various potential extremes, plausible extremes, and then ask what would that mean for policy. So quickly to run you through part of what we've been doing in our thinking here. So we start from this idea that what is the digital transformation? Well, it's really a combination of a whole range of technologies that are rapidly developing and they're rapidly expanding. And while each of these areas, be it cloud computing or the Internet of Things or big data, particularly artificial intelligence, where we're seeing huge, rapid transformational developments taking place recently, it's actually how they all come together and create this new ecosystem that is potentially globally available and that is allowing new business models as well as really generating the basis for a new economy and a new society on a global scale. And we're seeing the beginnings of that, and this is saying, how could that go further? What could that look like? What are some of the different ways this could go? So, the next slide, some of the first steps we said in really trying to push people into the future, we're saying, okay, well, what are some reasonable assumptions we could make? These, again, are not predictions, but for the sake of argument, let's imagine what if we found ourselves in a world in 2030 where we basically had universal connectivity, where everyone on the planet had a smartphone of at least the power of today's smartphone and 4G connectivity everywhere on the planet by 2030. It's certainly by no means a done deal, but it's within the range of plausibility. What if we are seeing this world in which digital business models are disrupting most industries? So we've seen this recently with, in taxis and automobiles, in accommodation, on online entertainment, of course. What if we see this expanding out across industries, really, and we're in a world of really rapid disruption? What if we see that physical production is moving increasingly localized and automated, that most of the global trade we see is actually not in physical products but in digital files? If we see a high degree of automation of work tasks relative to what we humans do now in 2017, if virtual work predominates, so that whether through telepresence or through working through virtual reality workplaces, we find ourselves in a world where really people increasingly can live anywhere and work anywhere. And of course, this one that's maybe the most guaranteed in this, is that really just as the whole world becomes connected almost by definition, most of the internet users, most of the creators on the internet are of course located in Asia and Africa. So those are the things we started with, of getting people's mindset into, okay, let's imagine this world. But then we face these key critical uncertainties. And what we did within the organization is we went to talk to people and we're still in the process of doing this, but talking to people in the various policy areas and asking them, what keeps them up at night? What do they wonder? Are they not sure about when they think about this future, where they could see, yes, it most likely is going to go this way, but really we don't know, and we could see the world going a different way. And we're saying, okay, let's identify what those critical uncertainties are, think of the plausible extremes, and then what we've done is bring those into and try to group them in scenarios that I'll mention briefly at the end. But I wanted to give a few examples of some of these critical uncertainties that have come up so far, and this is very much an evolving list. But one of the big ones is really about who controls the data. There are questions now about individuals. Are individuals going to demand greater control over their data in terms of that ability to even be able to access and trade themselves, the log of all the keystrokes that they may have given, all of the kind of pieces of their personal data, what could be considered personal data that are currently being collected by corporations. So there's an issue there about could there be a real shift to giving individuals greater control there. Another one, of course, is governments. Are governments going to have really gain a significant ownership and control of the data of individuals? Corporations is again obviously where a lot of the data is residing now. But then another question is actually, is this, many people are seeing data as the new oil. It's got a fundamental importance because it is the raw input into artificial intelligence, which is a key creator of value in this new digital economy. But there are other suggestions here that we could actually be in a world in 2030 where data is so ubiquitous, where you walk down the street and there are so many sensors gathering so many times, the data set of who is in Geneva on a particular day, doing what, seeing who, in what mood, that data set may be collected by so many different sources of, so many different sensors, so many different apps, that we may actually find ourselves in a world where data is the new air, where we are really breathing this in, and where it actually is fairly low barriers of entry to using this data to create value, but it may also be a world that has implications for privacy as well, of course. Another related piece is market structure, and here there's the big debate between, are we going to see a continued consolidation around a few global technology platforms that are increasingly all covering about the same sort of sphere of activities as each other, but competing with each other, and but due to network effects and economies of scale are really a few dominant large ones, or will we see a sort of continuous wave of decentralized disruption where even the corporations that we are seeing now, the large global tech platforms, are broken up, are challenged, and just like MySpace and Netscape in the past, they are being replaced again by new incumbents. I spoke about work a bit. I'll go to of course, the internet is one, very relevant here, where a big critical uncertainty seems to be whether it continues to be this sort of globally integrated or whether we see the emergence of the splinter net of separate blocks, obviously between countries or between geographic regions or groupings of countries potentially. But then the other dimension of this is sort of the walled gardens between corporations, where it could become increasingly difficult, or that it's a hassle, there's friction to move between whether you're an Android user or an iOS user and so forth, and that you could see an increasingly sort of division in the internet between the spheres of different global digital platforms. And then the next slide is obviously a number of other ones are around well-being. A huge issue is inequality, both within societies and whether the whole global convergence of developing countries will continue, given the change in development routes for them in this new digital economy. And then and issues of security and privacy. Will we face continued sort of muddling along cyber risk, or could we really make cyber risk a fairly minimal part, or could cyber risk become really such a big issue that gets so out of control that it is having a major impact on all of the rest of the digital transformation? And then, of course, this question of the end of privacy. What's happening on privacy? Is it actually going to become increasingly futile to attempt to restrict privacy in the world of such an abundance of data? And then finally, this key question about governments. What are the roles that governments are going to take in this new world? We're already seeing some examples of governments that are taking a much more sort of activist role, embracing the digital transformation and taking initiative to actually make themselves take a role that could almost be considered governments being the platform in the digital economy. So I'm just going to go really quickly to here to mention that the next one, yep, that one, yeah, just to say that then we've grouped these up into some sort of buckets of scenarios, which lightly correspond to sort of the individuals with a greater control, the government sort of really becoming platforms, one where sort of we see this continued consolidation to global tech titans, and finally this last one where really the data becomes so ubiquitous and the artificial intelligence is so accessible that this is a world, a highly decentralized world where easy entry for multiple actors. So I won't go into those in detail now, but just to say that our next step is to be working these through the different committees and parts of the OECD, the different policy areas, to ask what does it mean for them and what could some of the policy implications be under these various scenarios and under the various sides of the critical uncertainties. And really the question I would throw out to you now that I would love to hear from you on is, in each of your areas, what do you see as the key critical uncertainties where you can admit that we don't know and we need to be preparing for not just one future, but a potential range. So I look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
So thanks so much, Duncan. That was a really great overview of the project. So we're going to move to our panel now. We're going to have some brief interventions from them, reacting to the foresight work, but also to the project as a whole. Sort of what are sort of the main outputs we should deliver through the project. But then once we do that, I hope you'll stay a little bit. We have the room for a little bit longer, and we can have an interactive discussion. So Carolyn, why don't we start with you?
Yes, thank you very much, Molly and Duncan, for setting the context so well for the Going Digital project, and also to the organizers for including us within this open forum. As a member of the private sector, and also more generally, business participates at the OECD as a member of BIAC, where we represent business from multiple sectors as well as of different sizes. We participate broadly across the multiple issues that concern the digital economy. So it includes taxation, trade, labor issues, very many of the critical uncertainties that Duncan has put on the table. Business is at the forefront of the digital transformation with the innovations that enable sustainable growth and development, both globally and locally, nationally. We absolutely understand the need of the Foresights Group to establish scenarios that are extreme in each of the dimensions that has been selected to really enable, and Duncan used the term provoke people to think out of the box about potential futures. However, our concerns is that these scenarios, and especially from business, the global tech titan scenario, may be taken out of context of this valuable exercise and be misunderstood, resulting in regulatory approaches that would adversely impact business and consequently the potential of the digital transformation, and very relevant at the IGF itself, the realization of the Sustainable Development Goals. The digital future doesn't just happen. We really all need to work together and actively shape it. Government working with business across multiple sectors and different sizes, the technical community, civil society, including both consumer and labor groups and other interested parties to reflect our respective needs and challenges inclusively. We are very glad that the Going Digital finding, the preliminary finding, is that realizing the full potential of the digital economy will require an integrated and holistic policy environment. For us, this means that it would consider firstly, the interdependence of economic, social, cultural, technical, and governance factors. It should incorporate needs of the different stakeholder communities, the ones that I've mentioned, be evidence-based. This is something that the OECD is fantastic at and has a great history in doing, and is also focused on enabling sustained investment. Again, the economic context for the OECD, specifically as it relates to the IGF, investment is not possible without growth, and without growth, realization of the SDGs would be seriously hampered. So it is critical that the resulting policy framework focuses on creating an environment that would enable growth. So focusing specifically within that context, we believe that stakeholders really need to work towards an integrated, holistic policy environment, and we propose that an additional scenario be created that combines elements of each of the existing foresight scenarios that have been identified from workshops with stakeholders. Furthermore, this integration would also make explicit the point that Duncan has emphasized, which is that these scenarios in reality coexist. And so this scenario would firstly serve as a common vision of the opportunity and promise that is presented by the digital transformation for economic and societal benefits for the Going Digital project, but also while identifying challenges that would need to be addressed in order to realize this vision. Secondly, this integrated scenario would serve to validate the proposed integrated policy framework for the Going Digital project. And thirdly, it would serve as a concrete focus point for discussion on balancing the different policy issues and regulatory recommendations that are under discussion. This goes back to some of the points that Molly and Duncan had made about the need to get out of the siloing of issues. So in summary, what we propose is that the existing 4 scenarios that are shown there be used as working mechanisms. I think Duncan looks at it as tools to really enable great dialogues, but that the outcome, the critical uncertainties and the findings can be integrated to serve as a common vision so that all stakeholders can work towards the same goal and create an integrated, holistic policy environment that encourages sustained investment, which means for both the supply and demand side, that can enable healthy digital ecosystems that can deliver on the promise of digital transformation. In other words, that integrated scenario would provide the concrete framing for the project. Elements of this integrated vision can include, for example, how the different stakeholders, as well that includes government, public and private organizations, as well as individuals, can share or should share responsibility. And this makes real some of the OECD risk management guidelines. So instead of shifting responsibilities to a single stakeholder, how do we all work together to enable this? Secondly, to enable and facilitate the digital transformation across borders, are there new considerations in terms of needing to develop and design interoperable policy frameworks? Thirdly, how can existing sectoral regulations complement best practices in self-regulation to enable fulfillment of the potential? Again, I think that the digital transformation is enabling these cross-sectoral, cross-issues. And the scenario would create an opportunity to really discuss that. So this can then provide a framework for some concrete outputs from the Going Digital project. And this would include, and it goes right back to really the history of the OECD in terms of, firstly, sharing of good practices and policy options and evidence of holistic policy approaches that has shown proven progress in enabling digital transformation. Secondly, and very practically, a digital policy toolkit that would include things like, for example, who needs to be at the table, who should be at the table, policy elements that need to be put in place, and examples of effective policy practices, again, integrating the different frameworks and issues that are in place. And thirdly, accurate and inclusive measures of progress in the digital transformation, including implementation of policy recommendations. So I think these are all things that the OECD is already doing and is fantastic at. So I think we just repeat to you and confirm what it is that you're already doing and thinking as really valuable output. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Carolyn. That was really helpful hearing the business side of you. Thank you. Johannes, we'll hear from you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Molly. Thank you for inviting me to give the government perspective on the foresight scenario and on the policy project. First, on Duncan's presentation, this is for us as government officials is a very helpful endeavor, because the Swiss government does not do strategic foresight, especially, certainly not in the way that you are doing it. So this is a great value added that you provide to us. I think other governments are probably in the same situation. I'm not gonna put my money on one scenario or the other, but I'm gonna highlight just one aspect that is sort of inside various several of the scenarios, and that is the perceived gap between technology and the economy on one hand, and policy on the other hand. So some people have said there is the economy 4.0, but policy 1.0. I think it also came out in Molly's presentation first. So from our perspective, that statement is not a very helpful statement, because first of all, many regulations are actually technologically neutral, and so this gap is maybe not that big as one would imagine. At the same time, if there is a gap, that might actually also be helpful, because there's no, it wouldn't be very helpful to innovate regulation, to regulate innovation away, in a way. So, there needs to be a little bit of air, so innovative business models can emerge and develop. That is certainly our view as the Swiss government. And the current dynamism in applications and business models comes from the fact that there has been this air where these companies and actors could actually develop. And the fact that government is a little bit inert or a little bit slow to react to every single development might actually be a boon for society. Of course, there are externalities emerging from digital transformation. Maybe the churn of people losing jobs and having to find new jobs is increasing, is getting faster. So governments have to invest more in education and retraining workers. There's no disputing this, but as a general approach, we don't think it is necessary to overregulate from the beginning. So I think in terms of plausibility, and this inertia, government inertia, is likely to stick around a little bit. So I think in terms of your scenario, you can look at where that creeps up. So I think those are the scenarios that we would consider to be pretty relevant for or those elements of the scenario that are relevant for the future. Just another couple of thoughts on the policy project that Molly has presented. Again, a very helpful endeavor for governments, because you force us to think horizontally or transversally, diagonally if you want. You are, by having a holistic approach, you are putting people in play with each other that usually don't talk to each other. Governments are a little bit silos, as you certainly know. And so you're helping us to cut across that. I know you have to do it as well within the OECD, because you have to work with so many policy communities. But all of our support for that. This is a great asset that the OECD brings. It's the breadth of experience, of course, in addition to the evidence-based policymaking that's been mentioned before. So keep going. We want to push you towards coherence, and you should also try to push us towards a coherent, integrated policy making. The package that will come out, the integrated policy framework that you mentioned, will certainly be a useful tool for all governments to assess themselves against, see where they stand, where their national digital strategies stand, all the various policies that governments undertake, where they stand vis-a-vis the best practices that the OECD will certainly deliver in the context of this project. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Johannes, for sharing the government perspective. Olga, can we hear from you from the Internet technical community?
Thank you very much. I'm sure I have to go to the mic. Thank you very much for the invitation, and thanks for presenting these very interesting projects and documents, which are extremely useful for all of us. My perspectives in this panel will be as my role of university teacher from Argentina, investigating the impact of technology in society, and also as a member of the Internet Society Board of Trustees and a member of the Internet Society community, because I am the chapter leader in Argentina. So this will be my perspective from my comments. And I would like to, after thanking you and thanking other colleagues for sharing their perspectives, I would like to capture a comment made by Duncan about rapid change. Rapid change. I've been participating in this WSIS and internet governance process since the beginning, since the early, like 15 years ago. And I was thinking about this rapid change concept. And I thought that we are talking about new things, artificial intelligence, blockchain, impact in labor, many things that are already changing very rapidly. But many other things haven't changed at all. We still have areas of the world without connectivity. We still have half of the world without internet. We still have a lack of infrastructure in many areas of the world. We still have people with hunger. We still have people without water. So what I have seen in investigating these issues in the last perhaps 15 or 12 years is that, yes, there is an avenue for rapid change, but there is also a lower avenue that goes slowly. And that is a gap that, in my modest opinion, may be growing with this even rapider, I don't know if that word exists, more rapid change from now on, because these new technologies are bringing many disruptive changes to the economies. And what happens with developing countries? Are developing economies able to capture these changes? So I would like to stress a report made by Internet Society called Path to Our Digital Future. It is online, of course, in the Internet Society website. Very interesting report made after many interviews made to experts all over the world. It was presented in the 25th anniversary of Internet Society, like 2 months ago. So I encourage you, if you're interested in these issues, to check the report. And some things in the report really caught my attention in relation with this session, the digital divide. What I talked, this different speed of involvement of technology in the developed and the developing world may be even stronger in the near future. And Duncan was talking about a scenario and a horizon of 2030. And I cannot even imagine what may happen in 15 years so far. But what I can think about developing economies, are developing countries able to capture all the transformation good and incorporate them into their economies? Think that, for example, in Latin America, most of the economy is based on the work and involvement of small and medium enterprises. Can small and medium enterprises really get all the technology into their infrastructure so easily? And also these new platforms that we are talking about that are so good and so transforming, they are mainly based in developed economies. So how can small companies perhaps share their content, share their products, and share their services if they're even far away, not having enough infrastructure to reach there, or perhaps not have the ability or the knowledge or the elements of technology to be included? Personal freedoms. Big companies and big platforms being away from developed countries are collecting a lot of information. Is that okay for the countries that are far away, how they are going to capture this good, and how they're going to capture the challenges that all this information that has been placed in other countries being used? So these challenges are, for me, how can a policymaker capture these changes? I think that I've been studying how developed countries are building their strategies, and they are mainly based on a multi-stakeholder approach of working together. Not only the government, but with private sector, also with associations, unions, universities, and that cooperative work is the one that is leading towards a more strategic view and approach to the many challenges. And my fear is that in developing countries, sometimes the urgencies are others, and it's difficult perhaps to look at the broad pictures when you have other urgencies to solve, because you maybe have some local problems to solve first. So I would encourage you to check the report I told you about. This Path to Our Digital Future is extremely interesting. For my investigation at the university, I have found a lot of information. One of the interviewees, it was me, but many other experts from all over the world. I will stop here, and maybe we have comments from the audience, and thank you very much for the invitation.
Thanks so much, Olga and Nasser. So we have the pleasure of having your comments.
Thank you very much. I wanted to start building on the comments of Professor Cavalli on the importance of this multi-stakeholder approach, and from the Civil Society Advisory Council at the OECD working on digitalization. I think the first thing to do is to recognize the active and continued support of the OECD, the Secretariat, and the Committee on the Digital Economy Policy, to the participation of civil society, NGOs, activists and experts global-wide that the CSAC, the Civil Society Advisory Council, is facilitating, now facilitating the work of more than 200 NGOs, experts and activists right now. And we have been doing so since the 90s decade, before this multi-stakeholder notion emerged to the policy-making agenda. So I think this is the first thing to note, to recognize the contribution of the OECD in this sense. It's not a perfect model, of course, it's always improvable, but it could be a good starting point for other international settings now starting to incorporate this multi-stakeholder thing. Now going to substance, this is a stimulating document indeed, and I need to recognize that. I was really surprised. Used to this more evidence-based, positivistic, quantitative approach where the OECD has been traditionally working and doing so well. This should be also recognized. Now we have this exercise, this imagination, foresight, perspective exercise, which I should say that it's really interesting to think about the future, and, well, having an organization taking such innovative steps is something which needs to be recognized, and I'm happy to engage on this. And I have been happy to find things such as the role of automation, specifically AI, that the OECD is now starting to work on, and especially on privacy. Privacy is fundamental here. Without privacy, there is no choice, there is no freedom, there is no democracy, there is no trust, and without trust, our business colleagues or governments colleagues will recognize there is no way to enable the benefits of digitalization, the benefits of the adoption of the digital technology. So having this privacy thing recognized in the document is very important. I would really suggest, in order to improve the plausibility of these scenarios, to not frame privacy as a blocker, something that slows down innovation and growth, but as an enabler in the same way that brakes in cars enable them to run safely in the infrastructures. This is the same thing for data-driven innovation, for any data-based activity, digital activity. We need privacy, so it's a great news to find this recognition in the document of the OECD. Now, going to the plausibility of these scenarios, well, the plausibility is always connected to how these scenarios are connected to the material conditions that could make the scenarios possible. So first here, the first thing to note is the convenience to first incorporate to the document the existence of privacy-preserving technologies, and I'm happy to announce, to inform here that the US Census Bureau will be incorporating privacy-preserving technologies in the next edition, in the 2020 edition, which is really important. But there are also some technologies such as quantum computing, which are really disruptive because they will be challenging the capacity of cryptography to still protect, again, privacy, but also the security, the safety of financial transactions. This has not been reflected in this document, and I think that quantum computing should be added here. Now, another element that will contribute to increase the plausibility of this document will be to incorporate the global dimension, which I'm not sure if it's fully incorporated here. 80% of the developed countries have broadband connections. We know that, but as Professor, Olga has noted, half of the population is still not connected. This is 3.9 billion persons. And among those who are less connected, women has 60% less chances to be connected than men. And people with some kind of ethnical identification will have a 40% less chances to be connected. So incorporating this global issue, this global dimension, will really increase the plausibility of the document. And finally, the energetic condition. I want to insist on this. We cannot put energy on the ceteris paribus part of the economic equation here. We cannot do that, and I will give you just a simple example, the blockchain case, the Bitcoin case. We are always these days talking about this Bitcoin case. It's 32 terabytes per hour that Bitcoin is consuming right now, which equates to the energy consumption of entire countries, such as Denmark, such as Bulgaria. So all this news that we are seeing these days about Bitcoin transform into this kind of energy consumption. And we should take into consideration that much of this energy power is produced by coal factories. Therefore, when we are talking about Bitcoin or blockchain technologies with all the benefits that it could bring, we should also think about also the carbon footprint of these technologies. And we should expand this to the entire digitalization, a digital transformation issue. So incorporating the energetic condition, the energy to the report, to the scenarios, is very important here. Otherwise, we will be talking about some immaterial things which are really interesting, which are possible, but which are not really connected to the material conditions. And when we talk about material conditions, we also talk about rare materials, and then we could think about quantifying what is the impact of digitalization on the production of violence when we think about mines and wars and this kind of issues. So these are political issues that we should really take into consideration in order to really understand and think about the future. So on outcomes, first, we need a consistent body of policy regulations, policy recommendations capable to provide a sustainable digitalization development. We need the OECD to produce what the OECD is best at, which is the production of measurement frameworks and statistics on digitalization to really understand what are the effects of digitalization. And finally, I hope that one of the outcomes of this process is the reinforcement of this multi-stakeholder cooperation. I think the OECD has really proved, has really showed how the participation of really different stakeholders, business corporations, governments, technical community, labor unions, we all can work together in order to really improve the outcomes of these policy discussions. And there we have the cryptographic recommendations of the OECD, the digital risk assessment, the privacy guidelines, and they have been really influential since the 80s because of this multi-stakeholder approach. So with this, I will finish my intervention, thanking the OECD, and hope questions can be made.
So thanks so much, Suso, and all the panelists. I know I speak for Duncan when I say we've gotten an awful lot of food for thought here as we go forward and refine the scenarios, the integrated policy framework, and the other aspects of the project. But if you don't mind staying, we would have time to take a couple questions from you to try to stimulate some type of interactive debate. So do you have, yes?
Yeah, hello, my name is Ingrid Volkmer. I'm a professor at the University of Melbourne, and my field is global communication, so I've dealt with globalization for, I dare to say, quite some time. And what I see here on this, on the IGF forum is that we focus on nations, and I understand that national governments, of course, are have a key role, they are key stakeholders in the digital economy and global civil society, but I think we also should look at the transnationalization or the globalization of societies and of all societies through digital communication. And I think if we take on that lens, we see also some ambiguities coming up. So you're talking here about scenarios and silos and so on, and I think your approach is terrific, but it might be worth to also look at the ambiguities of globalization, and digitalization in a global scale. So what we also see is, for example, yes, we talk about the digital divide, but if we look at, for example, places like Indonesia, where Australia is very close to, we also see that there are ambiguities between the rural and the metropolitan areas coming up, where big cities like Jakarta, like Mexico City, like Kuala Lumpur are becoming digital hubs in the landscape of a rural, totally digital imbalance. And I think that has implications on national policies, that also has maybe implications on economy and issues the OECD might need to work with. So what I'm saying is that digitalization carries or causes some fracturing of traditional societies, which I think we need to look at as well. And another big area is public communication. I mean, we talk here about fake news, and well, it's a bit of a buzzword, or has become a buzzword now. But I think what's more important is that we need to be aware how digital communication changes public spheres and deliberation also across societies. And these new axes, I think, are also relevant, and they are very crucial for the well-being and the issues you're talking about in your policies of societies. The connected citizen is now situated in developing countries, in even failed states, as well as in developed countries, and they all communicate now with each other, and they deliberate with each other. And I think that's a very important dimension maybe to look at when you talk about new futures of policy frameworks, which we tend to always look at from a national perspective, and that's what I wanted to raise.
Oh, that's great. Thanks very much. And we are looking a bit in the vector work, which I wasn't able to go into well, sort of how these fundamental properties of digital transformation are changing across national boundaries. But I take your point that I think we do need to better reflect this whole social and societal dimension in the framework. So we'll definitely look to do that in the future. Are there any other comments or questions from the floor? Yes?
I'm just wondering if any of your extreme scenarios focused on gender specifically.
So no, that's a great question, and I think it relates to some of the other ones, the questions I had about energy as well, which I thoroughly agree with, and about the digital divide, is that what we've done here is start with some of the key technological changes, and then some of the big high-level uncertainties we've seen around that. But we are now, the next phase of this is to really take this through and interact it with a number of other domains, of policy domains, and gender would be a critical one to delve into. I think and it intersects in part with this question of the digital divide that was being mentioned, both between countries but within different parts of societies as well as rural and urban. And I very much like the point about the ethnic digital divide there too, in terms of disaggregating the impacts that these are having. I think we start with this positing this idea that what if everyone on the planet, every man, woman, and child, potentially, just as a thought experiment, had access to the device. But even beyond that, then of course there are huge, even if we made that assumption, there are huge uncertainties about how much people use these technologies, how they use them, how they're labeled to use them, what level of, what's the level going to be between the sort of the base access that everyone in the world has versus those that haven't got access to the very highest and latest versions of these technologies? Does that help close differences or expand them? And I think that's a key uncertainty that we have, and it is one that's also can be influenced by policy. But just on a similar point, I thoroughly agree with the point that was made about energy use and material conditions more generally, as well as the environment. That this is what we're hoping to do is, in fact, take this first step out and interact it with the other policy areas, and identify where the critical uncertainties there are there as well. I think there's a really interesting critical uncertainty on energy between demand and supply, which is going to grow faster. We're seeing huge breakthroughs in the costs of supplying renewable energy. But on the other hand, we are seeing massive growth, and with if you add in things like the projected growth in virtual reality consumption, that's the data consumption and the energy consumption associated with that are huge as well. So it's there are really, really big questions on that front that we do help to bring into the next versions.
Well, I'm conscious we're standing between you and the lunch, so I'd just like to thank our panelists first for all of their really helpful interventions. Thank you very much. Also, thank you all for coming, and there is a little one-page flyer you should have received, and there's our website on the back, so please feel free to check it out and keep apprised of all the progress. So have a good lunch. Bon appetit.